Welcome back to another episode of the First Case Expert series, where we are talking with Jeff Wertz, our perioperative instrument coordination expert. I'm your host, Melanie Perry, and in today's conversation, we're addressing the IT perspective. And Jeff, where do we even start?
Yeah, so what we're talking about again, as a quick reminder, is how to build that business case of you wanting to bring in a new solution. Obviously, if you have IT engaged, this would be some sort of software solution or technology that's going to be integrating with the technical infrastructure at the hospital. So including them in that conversation is going to be critical, because literally everything down to the printers needs to be controlled, because all of those create security risks for any IT infrastructure. So what we want to go through is kind of building out the blueprint of different talking points to bring into them. And again, preface this saying that you need to go in and actually build a relationship with that individual and understand what their unique focus is, what the organization is trying to drive at, and be able to link your initiative onto that in some capacity is going to be the most convincing argument that you can have. But what we want to provide today is a couple basic items that everyone's going to be interested in. And those would be, how it's going to be integrating with their existing system. So what is the solution? How does it impact their EHR? How does it connect in with the EHR? How does it connect to other technology that's around in the OR, presumably, or in your SPD? Then secondly, looking at the data security and compliance. I mean, I think everyone in healthcare has seen or heard about disaster situations where hospitals have had to shut down for long periods of time because the EHR system has been compromised or patient information has been leaked. So there's tons of focus around that, as there should be. So understanding the data security side of it, and then also looking at how does this scale. So, I mean, you can kind of see that there's a bit of a theme with all these, with each one of these that we've discussed so far, of looking at, how it's impacting the current state versus how it's, avoiding things in the future, but then also looking at how it really scales and continues to sustain within the department and within the greater hospital infrastructure. So really want to build on that, looking at how it integrates with existing systems. I think we've already talked ad nauseum about just something as simple as surgeon preferences and seeing how complex that is. So that's where I would liken anyone that's in the perioperative space, understanding how complex that process is. I would say is very similar to how complex it is when you start looking at trying to line up all of the different technical solutions in the hospital and what's on the plate of all these IT departments in every facility. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, Melanie, how your experience has been with working with IT. I think a lot of times you have the experience of, we've been trying to call IT forever and we put in help desk tickets, but yeah. What's your experience been like?
I've had both. At one facility, the facility that I was the manager at in Fort Worth, I knew the IT guy by first name basis. I mean, it was a small facility. I knew where his office was, and his office was kind of scary because it was loaded with all sorts of computers and whirring things, and cords were everywhere. And I don't think he ever slept, but he was great. But it was very important when you talk to him to definitely do your best to speak his language, because what he cared about were those integrations. He cared about data and security. He cared about compliance. And that's the information that he needed in order to talk about when we were looking at a tracking system for our trays, and we were looking at communication systems for our vendors and different stuff like that. He wanted to know all the ins and outs, obviously, of the technology. And so, but it was great. I knew who he was, and I could talk to him. And because I had a relationship with him, it was pretty straightforward. At my other facility, IT was this very nebulous thing. I don't know. You would call some number and you'd put in a ticket number and you'd get an email that said it was received, and maybe they'd call you back or they wouldn't. And it's just because the organization was bigger. But because of the magnitude of the organization, sometimes it felt very difficult to actually be able to get that request out or to have those discussions until you went so far as to pull in upper leadership, upper management, and actually pull all those people into a room and have them at the table together. And then suddenly when we're all in the room together, then we could have those conversations because everybody was there paying attention and they were listening.
Yep. Yep. And as frustrating as it can be, it's a necessary role. So I mean, they're dealing with a whole lot on their plate, and everything can impact it. Like I mentioned earlier, things as simple as the printers can present backdoors that impact the overall security of the entire platform. So people are able to worm their way into those things. So that's why they take it so seriously. And so that's why I always recommend engaging with that IT executive or individual as early as possible as you can in the process. Anything that you're trying to bring in, they should have more than sufficient documentation to help facilitate those conversations. You don't have to know all the bells and whistles and all the terminology around it, but whoever you're trying to bring into that facility should be able to support that conversation and take it over as much as possible to make that an easy process. And everything should be taken into account of being able to discuss, what does interoperability look like? Are you connecting with other hardware components? Are you connecting with implantable? Are you connecting with the actual EHR system? What do all those connections look like? What does that mean to the actual workload for the hospital? Because their plate is traditionally very full in dealing with a lot of help tickets, let alone anything actually more substantial of trying to rehaul, surgeon preferences, things like that. So being able to understand that and engage with the vendor or whoever you're bringing in, and be able to convey how that's going to impact it is critical. And then that would naturally lead into the data security and compliance component of that. I think that we don't have to go on too long about that. I think everyone gets beat through their head enough on HIPAA as is, but it's a serious component and you need to be able to address it. I think ideally in a lot of these situations, if you're not dealing with patient record information, that's going to be the most helpful. But understanding the role that does play is critical in anything you're bringing in. And then really moving into the scalability of it, of how does this continue to grow? Does this touch other things in the future? How does it how does it work with other systems that you're looking to bring in? Because oftentimes there's, the left hand isn't talking to the right hand, and someone from the OR is bringing in a solution to communicate with the vendors versus SPD trying to do the same things. So that's a critical component that IT needs to be on the same page, and often has a hard time doing that because they're not in the OR and they're not interacting on a daily basis. So a lot of these conversations can be taking place that they have no idea about. And I think their most frustrating experience is when they're brought in at the last minute and they have to shut a whole initiative down because it wasn't taken into account, and they may already also have a different solution that's being utilized elsewhere. So it's a complex space, but I think you need to be able to engage with them early and be able to convey these important topics.
I 100% agree. And I'm hearing echoes from one of our very first episodes when we were talking about just giving people a seat at the table and making sure that everyone's voice is heard. And we have to think about all of the different areas that any solution that we implement, any change that we make, any new product or new technology, who all is it going to touch? Who is it going to affect? And we need to make sure that we're actually having that conversation with all those people. And I think IT is probably one of those groups that gets forgotten more often than not, because we're just going to plug it in. It's just going to work, right?
And that's a great point too. And it can actually be a huge benefit also in that if you include them early on, rather than going through a significantly more manual process, they might be able to suggest or provide tools that are already available that you were unaware of, that your health system already is already engaged with or have leveraged at other facilities. And I think bringing them in early in the conversation can help alleviate a lot of the heavy lifting in the long run of understanding how people are already doing it, because chances are your challenges are not that unique. Everyone feels like they're very unique to them and individualized, but a lot of times there's a lot of different point solutions out there, and the more that you're having those discussions and understanding how it's impacting the overall efficiency of the department. They want to be able to provide solutions, and if they already have something in place, then that gets you the answers that you're looking for a lot more rapidly.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking back to when we implemented a communication system with our vendors and having the technology and making sure that, we were compliant and everything was HIPAA safe, of course, and security. But then also we had sterile processing and the OR together in those conversations because the technology was communicating with vendors in terms of instruments and supplies needed and things that they needed to bring. But then it was also communicating with them our patient schedule so that they knew when they had to have them here, what the surgeon was posting, the extra
novel
things.
Concept.
Yeah, novel concept, right? So that, but you hit on a big point. The OR wants to do something. Well, SPD wants to do something. But if we don't talk to each other and we're both trying to implement something new, we're going in circles if we're not communicating together. So
again, we're back at the surgeon preference card.
Exactly.
Everyone's making a note on a different card and using a different point of reference.
Exactly. And then nobody knows and everybody's mad and frustrated. And that's not where we want to be. And it can be alleviated with open communication and making sure that we remember all of the voices and all of the representatives when we are having these conversations with new ideas and technology. Excellent insights today, Jeff. Spoken like you've got a little bit of experience in this regard and seen things a time or two, but that is all the time that we have for today. Join us next time as we conclude this conversation on perspectives and building a business case while we talk about supply chain and all of the variables that we bring into that when we are looking at the needs and how supply chain actually brings those products in. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching this episode of the First Case Expert series.